Trump administration announced new sanctions against Hezbollah, a Lebanese political movement the Trump administration describes as an example of Iranian-sponsored terrorism. But his justification had some factual challenges. RT correspondent Dan Cohen is live in the RT America newsroom following the news. Dan, strange timing of these sanctions, no?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, President Trump seemed to put the controversy surrounding Saudi Arabia aside, at least for the day. His announcement of more sanctions on Hezbollah was met with a raucous applause.
Just a few moments ago, I signed legislation imposing even more hard-hitting sanctions on Hezbollah to further starve them of their funds, and they are starving of funds.
The sanctions amend the Hezbollah International Financing Prevention Act of 2015 to target any non-American who knowingly assists or provides support for Hezbollah, governments that provide it financial support or arms, and adds sanctions on Hezbollah itself. Trump said it's part of his squeeze on Iran, which he claims is the world's largest sponsor of terrorism. Now, he chose to make the announcement on the anniversary of what his administration often cites as the best example of Iranian-sponsored terrorism, the 1983 attack on the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon.
It was the single deadliest day for the Marines since Iwo Jima. The attack was carried out by Hezbollah, which Iran was instrumental in founding a year earlier to advance its radical agenda and remain its main patron today. And we are doing a big number on Iran today, in case you haven't noticed.
One problem with that narrative, Hezbollah wasn't founded until 1985, 2 years after the attack occurred. But that didn't stop CNN's Jake Tapper from taking it a step further. On Twitter, Tapper claimed that the attack on the Marine barracks was carried out by an Iranian terrorist. While the perpetrator has never been definitively identified, CIA field agent Robert Baer, who was in Beirut at the time, said the attack happened because the U.S. was acting as a participant in Lebanon's civil war.
The Marines killed a lot of Shiites, so we're talking about simple revenge. We didn't have a clue who we were killing. It was just numbers. It made good above the fold headlines, an eye for an eye.
With American politicians and pundits priming the country for a war with Iran, facts seem to be a minor inconvenience. For In Question, Dan Cohen, RT.
There is a problem there, and one has to be honest about those things. There is a problem that you can end up being useful to people who you don't particularly like. Everybody has those sorts of problems when they're trying to deal with controversial subjects that you don't want to give fodder to your enemy. And then you have to make, decisions. You have to think through what you're saying, and you have to carry on responsibly.
Do you ever hold back?
Excuse me?
Do you ever hold back? Do you ever self-censor?
Yeah, the Holocaust industry is now an old book for me. As I said, it's 10 years ago. But when I wrote the book, I can say to you metaphorically, my parents had already passed away, but metaphorically, my parents were right behind me. They were looking at me over my shoulders, and they were looking at every word.
Okay, but I ask you, you make the point that's 10 years ago, and I appreciate that, but it's only recently you said of Israel, it's a crazy country, it's like a junkie. Every few years they go to war, they need their fix, they're lunatics. American Jews don't want to defend that.
Yeah, Israel is carrying on in a lunatic fashion. I would like to ask you...
And Hezbollah, who you went to meet?
I would like to ask you, name me another country in the world. 2003, Israel was the cheerleaders for the war in Iraq. 2006, it went into war in Lebanon. 2008, 2009, it attacked Gaza. Now it talks about attacking Iran. If you read the Israeli papers every day, they talk about, should we attack Gaza? Should we attack Lebanon? Should we attack Syria? Name me another country in the world that falls into that category.
Well,
that's a lunatic state.
Israel would point to a number of its neighbors and say exactly the same thing.
No, you show me how many countries has Iran planned to attack? No, let's ask a simple question. How many countries in the last 10 years has Iran attacked?
When you look...
No, that's a fair question. How many countries in the last 10 years has Iran attacked?
When you look at the history of Israel, do you not have some sympathy or understanding, people would ask, as to why they feel threatened and why
we're not talking
they
about why they feel threatened. We're talking about a country that every 2 or 3 years goes to war. I was, of course, happy to meet the Hezbollah people because it's a point of view that's rarely heard in the United States. And I have no problem saying that I do want to express solidarity with them. And I'm not going to be a coward and a hypocrite about it. I don't care about Hezbollah as a political organization. I don't know much about their politics. And anyhow, it's irrelevant. I don't live in Lebanon. It's a choice that the Lebanese have to make, who they want to be their leaders, who they want to represent them. But there is a fundamental principle. People have the right to defend their country from foreign occupiers. And people have the right to defend their country from invaders who are destroying their country. And that, to me, is a very basic, elementary, and uncomplicated question. My parents went through World War II. Now, Stalin's regime was not exactly a bed of roses. It was a ruthless and it was a brutal regime, and many people perished. But who didn't support the Soviet Union when they defeated the Nazis? Who didn't support the Red Army? And all the countries of Europe which were occupied, who gets all the honors? The resistance. The communist resistance, it was brutal. It was ruthless. The communists were not, it wasn't a bed of roses. But you respect them. You respect them because they resisted the foreign occupiers of their country. And if I'm going to honor the communists during World War II, even though I probably would not have done very well under their regimes, if I'm going to honor them, I'm going to honor the Hezbollah. They show courage, they show discipline. I respect that.
هذا التوصيف صحيح، ولكن قبل سنة 2000 بعد 2000 صار في انسحاب إسرائيلي من منطقة الجنوب، صار في انقسام بداخل لبنان بين الأطراف السياسية اللبنانية حول موضوع مستقبل السلاح وموضوع المقاومة. يعني هذا الانقسام الذي حصل أنت هون عم تفوت طرف فيه، أنت عم تكون طرف. بالنهاية أنت عم تقول أنت عم تجي على لبنان زيارة، ولكن ما عم تشوف تداعيات اللي عم بيصير. بالنهاية تداعيات حرب تموز على الناس.
Listen, if you want to close your eyes and believe it was all over in May 2000, you can do so. You can play that game. But the reality was, and everyone understood it, that the Israeli attitude was, we're going to knock out Hezbollah. And they began planning for a new war right after they were forced to leave in 2000. They found their excuse, their pretext, in July 2006. But there's no question among rational people that Israel was never going to let that victory go by, the Hezbollah victory go by. They were determined to teach
كان يمكن تجنبه. يعني هون ممكن يقدر الطرف الآخر يقول لك ممكن تجنبه وما توقع بالفخ.
It could not have been avoided. There is no way that the United States and Israel are going to tolerate any resistance in the Arab world. You want to pretend it can be avoided, you can play that game. But serious people, clear-headed people, knew there was going to be a war sooner or later. You think there's not going to be another war? You think Israel is going to allow that defeat in July 2006? You want to pretend it's Hezbollah that's causing the trouble? No, there will be another war, and the destruction will probably be 10 times worse, maybe even more, than July 2006, because Israel is determined with the United States to put the Arabs in their place and to keep them in their place. Now, how can I not respect those who say no to that? You know, during the Spanish Civil War, there was a famous woman, they called her La Pasionaria, Dolores Ibarruri, from the Spanish Republic. And she famously said, it's better to die in your feet than to walk crawling on your knees.
ولكن هذا خيار الشعب اللبناني كله. يعني مش
I totally agree. I'm not telling you what to do with your lives. I'm not telling you. And if you rather live crawling on your feet, I could respect that. I could respect that. People want to live. How can I deny you that right? But then how can I not respect those who say they rather die on their feet? How can I not respect that? Israel and the United States are attacking because they will not allow any military resistance to their control of the region. That's the problem. If Hezbollah laid down its arms and said, we will do whatever the Americans say, you wouldn't have a war, that's true. But you'd also be the slaves of the Americans. I have to respect those who refuse to be slaves.
ما في غير طريقة واحدة اللي هي المقاومة العسكرية.
I don't believe there's another way. I wish there were another way. Who wants war? Who wants destruction? Even Hitler didn't want war. He would much prefer to have accomplished his aims peacefully, if he could. So I'm not saying I want it, but I honestly don't see another way unless you choose to be their slaves. And many people here have chosen that. I can't really say I can understand it. You want to live. I can't really say I respect it. You know, so many dead, so much destruction, before the bodies are even buried, before the buildings are even rebuilt. The person who's responsible for it all, you can't wait to welcome him. You can't wait to roll out the red carpet. I can't respect that.
أنتم مثل ما قلتم رجال وأنتم خالدون كما خلود الأرز في القمم وأنتم مجد أمتنا وأنتم القادة وتاج رؤوسنا أنتم السادة أحبائي أقبل نبل أقدام بها يتشرف الشرف بعزة أرضنا انغرست فلا تكفوا وترتجفوا بكم بكم سنغير الدنيا ويسمع صوتنا القمر بكم نبني الغد الأحلى بكم نمضي وننتصر بكم سنغير الدنيا ويسمع صوتنا القمر بكم نبني الغد الأحلى بكم نمضي وننتصر بكم نمضي وننتصر بكم نمضي وننتصر
I mean, you have paid a great cost for speaking the truth, and what happened at DePaul was a large part of that. And looking through the papers that were submitted at the time of this refusal of your tenure, there were different elements in the case that they were presenting against you. But this question of civility was definitely a part of what they were saying was a problem with you being given tenure at the university. Do you want to talk about the way that you saw what happened there 10 years ago?
I'm not going to sing my praises because I'm more painfully aware of my faults than even my worst enemies know. But I'm not reckless. That's the thing. People take me as being reckless and just shooting off my mouth. That's absolutely untrue. I am very careful about what I say. Even in the last year at the pool, it was 2006, and it was Israel's attack on Lebanon. And I was in one of the demonstrations, walking along with everybody. I assume you were probably there. It was July, August. I was in one of the demonstrations against, it was really a brutal attack just in the last 72 hours, and the war was already over. It was over. The war was over. The UN resolution had been signed, and they were just waiting to implement it on the ground. In those last 72 hours, Israel dropped 4.6 million cluster bomblets on southern Lebanon, completely saturating it. It's a very ugly affair. It's like a science fiction movie what they did to South Lebanon. And then some people asked me, do you want to speak? Do you want to speak? I said, yeah, okay, fine. I'm not going to run or shy away. And I went up to speak, and I said, well, today there was a resolution, one of those unanimous resolutions in the U.S. Congress declaring we are all Israel. During the war. Well, I said, I beg to differ. We are all Hezbollah today. And that wasn't like I wasn't thinking spur of the moment. I knew exactly what I was saying. I thought it through. I knew it was going to kill me at tenure time. And I did it anyway, because that's how I felt. Right now, the Lebanese people are resisting a foreign invasion. The resistance is being led by the Hezbollah. In exactly the same way during World War II, the resistance to the Nazi aggression was led by the communist parties. And I would be happy to say during World War II, we are all the Communist Party now. I'm going to say we are all Hezbollah now. Now, as it happened, it was picked up by Sean Hannity on Fox News. And then during my tenure battle, they started to play it over and over again. And one time, Sean Hannity took out a pencil and pointed at the screen and he said, "DePaul, we are watching you. We are watching you." So, I knew what was going to happen. And I did it anyway. I did it anyway. But it was not like some wild man in the wings. Not at all. I'm very careful.
هو عنوان لكل صاحب حق مظلوم مضطهد محاصر يقتل ويقتل أطفاله وتسبى نساؤه ويحاصر حتى العطش والجوع. هذا الرمز وهذا العنوان حاضر في هذه المعركة. اليوم نقول لكل الذين يخاطبون حزب الله ويقولون له: اخرجوا من هذه المعركة ولكم الأمان، تخلوا عن هذه المعركة وستبقون على قيد الحياة وستشطبون من لوائح الإرهاب. هذا ما عاد عروض سرية، بالتلفزيونات عم بيقولوا، كل يوم عم بيقولوا حزب الله يترك الإرهاب، ما عندنا مشكلة. الإرهاب الذي يعني عندهم المقاومة، الدفاع عن الأمة، دعم الشعب الفلسطيني، دعم الدفاع عن كرامات ومقدسات هذه الأمة. نحن نقول لهم وأنتم هنا شاهدون تحت هذا المطر، رجالنا ونساؤنا وأطفالنا ومجاهدونا وكل من يؤمن بهذا الطريق، نحن نقول لهم مقالة العباس بن علي: أبي الفضل في ساحة كربلاء أتعطون لنا الأمان؟ وشعب فلسطين لا أمان له، أطفال فلسطين لا أمان لهم، مجاهدو فلسطين لا أمان لهم، القدس لا أمان لها، المسجد الأقصى لا أمان له. أتعطوننا الأمان؟ وهؤلاء المظلومون المضطهدون لا أمان لكم. اسمع أيها المستكبر، لعنك الله ولعن أمانك.
بحبك يا لبنان يا وطني، بحبك بشمالك بجنوبك بسهل